In this episode, we're going to be making a pendant that's inspired by the Team Instinct logo. I'll be working from a kit, so if you would like to follow along, you can go to the link here and find your team's Poke Pendant making kit. Just about everything you need is contained in the kit, but a couple of other things you want to have on hand. Of course, some paper towels to protect your work surface and to dry your brush on. You're going to need a bowl of water so that you can clean your brush. Something to mix paints in, such as this empty canister lid. And then you want to have some scissors because you're going to need to trim the cord to the right length. It's also nice to have a craft knife on hand just for trimming and cleaning everything up before you paint. So, inside the kit you have your brushes. You have the paints, and then this clear one here, this is your clear finish for the very end, so we're going to put that over here for now. So I'm just going to get everything organized. The pendant starts out looking like this. So it's mostly finished already. You're going to need to do just a little bit of sanding to get it nice and smooth for painting. We do have sandpaper. Here is your cord, and then you also have a lanyard clip for if you want to turn this into something to clip onto your bag or purse or your keychain, or if you want to make it a necklace. And I've got a bead here, and I'll show you how to finish this as a necklace later on. And we're just going to put those to the side because we don't need them just yet. Now I have two paintbrushes here. This one gets nice and pointy when it's wet, so this is going to be our detail brush for doing the painting. The other one we're going to save for the finishing, so that just goes over here. So let's get started with just sanding this up a little bit. And this is where it's nice to just have the craft knife on hand, because sometimes there's some little bits that come loose when you're sanding, and they're a little bit hard to get out of all the little crevices. So you can get things nice and clean just with a craft knife on hand. So this is pretty smooth now. It doesn't need to be perfect. I actually like a little bit of texture on there because it does help to kind of look like feathers on the finished product. I missed one little spot there. Now once you're done sanding, it's important to get rid of all of the sanding dust so that your paint ends up nice and smooth and well adhered. I'm just going to dust this off. Okay, so now this is ready for painting. This is the fun part. I'm going to start out with yellow. So we have umber, yellow, white, and black. But a nice base coat of yellow is a good place to start. So what I like to do is get some water in there. There's actually some in the cap here, so I'm just going to do it like that. Just get it nice and thin because we want to do just a thin base coat and let some of the white show through. You'll find that it gives it a little bit more of a dimensional look instead of looking really flat if you paint it with a really thick coat. So we're just going to start brushing it on, and it's fine, just do the whole thing, because we're going to go back in with details later on. It's nice to just have a base coat on everything. And I just like to use the water to keep thinning it out until it looks like I need a little more paint. And I'll just grab a little more of the paint. And you can just keep working it into all the crevices with the water. And then in the area around the face, I want that to be a little bit lighter. So I'm just going to blot off a little bit of the yellow and really let some of the white show through towards the center. Again, it's going to just look more dimensional. Same thing with the tips of the wings, just brush a little off. And already it has a little bit more kind of visual texture to it instead of just being a really flat yellow. And I'm going to go ahead and just put some yellow on the back too, just to finish it off. And these paints are washable, so don't worry about getting it on your hands. You can just scrub it off with some soap and water. Okay, so my base coat is done. The next thing I'm gonna do is start adding in some shadows. Now you wanna add the shadows where you would naturally have a shadow if this were a truly, fully three-dimensional object. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my burnt umber brown color. Get my brush wet, grab a little bit of the brown, put it on my mixing plate. Also grab a little bit of the yellow because I don't want it to be quite so dark and dramatic. I want to blend this in a little bit. So the first area I'm going to do, you can see on here I've got some of the brown shadowing beside the body. We're going to do it a little bit on the tail. So let's do that on here. Just right along the edge of the body here. And we're going to blend this out more too, but I want to just get a first little bit, the darkest brown right along the edge. Now we're going to grab a little more of the yellow and mix that with what we have and start blending that out more. And then towards the edges, we're gonna really just lightly stroke the brush here and let the texture of the bristles show through. You want to keep the texture of the strokes because those actually start to resemble a feather-like texture. So just quick strokes, let them fade into the base coat. And that's already looking a lot more feathery. We're going to do a little bit of the same on the head, but not too much. And we want to do it just at the base of these feathers here, where a shadow would be. We don't want to do it in the center. That's actually going to be the brightest spot on the bird, because that's the part that will be furthest forward and catch the light most. We really want that to stand out. I'm going to do just a little bit in here too, like a shadow of the beak. And then for the actual beak, we want to take some straight burnt umber, brown color, just work it into the brush, make sure it's the right consistency. And this brush forms a pretty nice tip. So what we're going to do is along the side edge here of the beak, we're going to add the shadow. So if the beak has an angle like this, one side's going to be shadowed and one side's going to be highlighted. So I'm going to just add the shadow to this side. Okay. So there's my shadow side. And now it's actually a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to rinse my brush out and go over it one more time to just lighten it out a little bit so it's not quite so harsh. Now we're going to add the highlighted side. So for this, just grab some of the straight yellow. Again, make sure that it's the right texture on your brush. Just work it into the bristles a little bit. And we're going to do the opposite highlighted side of the beak. And I'd like for this to have a little bit more of a harsh line to really emphasize that light and dark difference. Okay, so we have the start of the shadow and light effect on the beak. I'm going to go back in a little bit later with some more black. For now, I'm going to pull out my white. Get started with the eyes because they're going to need to dry. They got a little bit yellowed when I was doing the base coat, so I'm just going to grab some pure white. Just dot that into the eye sockets here, and we'll go back in and add the black later once the white has dried so that your eyes really show up better. All right, just a little more white. You don't want it too thick though, because you will lose the cutout shape of the eyes. So while we have the white, I'm gonna mix it with some of the yellow that's already on there and just start doing my highlights on my wings. The tops are going to be highlighted and the bottoms will be shadowed. Grab a little more yellow, a little more white. Actually, it's best to pull these from the top again. We want to feather everything into the next color so that it resembles feathers. Okay. Do a little bit of that down here. Okay, now we're going to need a little more of the brown because I need to do the shadowing on the tail. So just right here at the edge where the tail meets the body, we're going to do the same thing as we did on the wings. Just brush a little bit on and feather it out. It's a little bit dark again, so I'm just going to grab a little more of the yellow and just go back over it, again going away from the body of the bird so that it just blends nicely into the rest of the tail feathers. I'm going to add just a little more dark right up here along the body. And just blend it out. Also going to add some shadowing along the bottoms of the wings. I'll go back with black later, but it's nice to have a couple different layers of the shadowing and highlights so they aren't quite so harsh. So we'll do a little bit at the bottom to accent those a little more. And same thing for the bottoms of the tail feathers. Not too much though, we want to make sure that it doesn't get too messy and muddy. So now that we have the brown shadows in, I'm going to go in with some black. This is really going to make it pop. And with these pots, they're easiest to work with when they're cut apart. So if you ever have some that are attached to each other, just take your scissors and cut them apart because it's so much easier to keep them from falling over and whatnot. So same as ever, grab some of your paint, make sure that it's watered down enough to be a good workable consistency. Saturate your brush towards the end. I'm gonna go ahead and on the detailing in the background here behind the bird, I'm going to paint those edges black, not the top part, but just the lower level of the kind of arrowhead outline. So I'm just gonna brush that on the whole outside. Get it a little bit on the top, don't worry about it, we can touch that up later. I think my paint is a tiny bit watery, so I'm going to get a little more of the undiluted paint. Okay, so my background is pretty well done now. I'm gonna go ahead and start adding more shadows to the bird itself. I want this to be fairly diluted. I'm actually going to even mix in a little bit of the yellow again to make a little bit more of a gray color. I'm going to add some shadows to the base of each wing here. Just quick brush strokes. Don't really want it to go all the way down, just kind of fading out towards the end. It's actually a little bit too wet, so I need a little more paint, a little more of the yellow. Again, just nice shadows along the base of the wing. Gonna do the same for the other side. Now I'm going to add the same type of shadowing to the side of the body. So I'm just going to go with the same side as I did a darker side on the beak. So this is going to be the darker side of my body also. Just brush a little bit along the edge. A little bit along the head too. Only on this side, I think. Actually, I'm going to add a little bit to this side also. It looks like it will make everything pop better. Oops, that was a little too much. If you get it anywhere you don't want it, just use a damp paper towel to just kind of dab it off a little bit to lighten it up, and then blend it back in. And then I think I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow right here where the tail meets the body, just to give that a little better definition. Right along there. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that, but I think that this needs some shadowing also. Oops, that's too much shadowing. I think it'll look better if it's a little bit more of a brown than a black in this area. It's a little bit too harsh. So I'm gonna get a little bit more brown shadowing here, make that a little bit darker. And then also blending these shadows out just a little bit with the brown. Soften it on that side a little bit. Okay, a little more down here. I think my tail feathers could use a little more definition. Just doing some little strokes here to make it have a little bit more of a dimensional shadowing going on. That's looking pretty good, I think. Now the beak definitely needs a little more attention. I'm going to go back in with the black and put a nice dark shadow along the edge of the shadowed side. Now I want to make this a little bit more yellow by doing some highlights that are really just the pure yellow. I'm going to do some transitioning between the brown to the lighter tips on these wings here. Same for the other side. I'm going to blend down again into the brown and then up into the light color. And then same thing for the head. Add some of the bright yellow out towards the edges and then leave it lighter in the center so the light's hitting on the face and really emphasizing that area. Blend it all out a little bit. Can add a little bit more to the beak. Now we're going to need the white again. I'm going to add some really bright highlight on the, whoops. We're going to add the brightest highlight on the beak here. Although, I think I want to make this a little more defined first. You want to do your brightest highlights last so you don't accidentally go and mess them up with another color. I'm going to add in the actual eyeballs now too. So just want to very carefully make sure it's not too watery but not too thick. I'm going to brush off a little bit so it doesn't glob on too much. Carefully, carefully just touch it to the eyeball. And then add a little bit over the top to give it that intense expression. Just very, very carefully. Got a little bit where it wasn't supposed to go. That's fine. If you mess it up, just get a damp paper towel, wipe it off, and try again. Now he's starting to have an expression. Okay, let's see, what else does this need? I think that the triangle needs to be brightened up a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is grab some of the white, whoops, grab some of the yellow, mix it together, make this nice, happy, bright yellow, and brush that along the raised area here. Some of the shape got a little bit lost when I was doing the black on the outside. Got a little bit messy. Alright, so I've just been kind of darkening the shadows, cleaning everything up, and then adding in any highlights that got a little bit lost when doing the shadowing. So now I need to add that highlight on the beak. Some straight white. Work it into the bristles a little bit. And then it's just going to be kind of a little dot right here at the top. Came out a little bit too white. Just gonna dab it off a little bit. Make my paint a little bit thinner this time. Add in that highlight. That's better. Some of these areas just needed a little bit more brown, so I'm just going back over anywhere that it doesn't look quite right. I'm adding a little bit of a highlight here on the body. It wasn't popping quite enough, so I darkened this side a little bit, lightened this side a little bit, and then just blend it together a little bit better. I'm trying to add just the tiniest little reflection on the eyes here, but it's a very small area. Well, kind of lost that eyeball a little bit. Gotta go back in with the black now. Yeah, that's pretty good. paint job is pretty much done now. So it needs to dry for a while, for probably at least an hour before everything's fully dry. We don't want to get the finish on there on paint that's not quite dry, because then it's going to just smear it all over. So I'm just going to close up my paints and give this a little bit of time to dry thoroughly. Now that the paint's dry, we can go ahead and start adding the sealer. Go ahead and just give it a little bit of a gentle mixing first. You don't want to shake it because then you're going to get air bubbles. Now with the other brush, grab some of that sealer and just start working it into all of the crevices. You want to try to keep it nice and thin. It's going to be much better to do multiple thin coats than try to do one or two really thick coats, because if you do that, you're inevitably going to end up with bubbles and brush strokes and whatnot. With this particular brush on finish, you have a pretty good working time, so go ahead and make sure that there's none stuck in those creases between the wing feathers. And then once an area is done, try not to go back over it again, because it's going to start drying, and if you go over it after it starts drying, that's when you're going to introduce excessive brush strokes into the finish. Alright, so there's the first coat of finish on this little guy here. So what I'm going to do, while he's drying on the one I did earlier, I'm going to show you how to finish it as either a necklace or as a clip-on for your backpack or keychain. So I rinsed out my brush because I'm going to need it again for doing more coats on that one. This one's already dry. So if you want to finish it as a necklace, you need to first just untangle the cord. Now we're going to start by just attaching it to the pendant. So just fold it in half at the center. Put it through the hole in the center from the back. You might need to grab something to help you push it through. Move this out of the way. Okay, so push it through with some sort of tool. There we go. So now you have a loop, which put both of those cords back through the loop. And now it's attached to the pendant. Now you need to decide about how long you want for it to be. If you want it really long, you can just tie a knot here, and then you would just be able to, loop it over your head. But I want it to be a little bit shorter than that. So I'm going to measure on myself about how long it needs to be. So it's about here. So I'm going to trim some of this excess, but not too close because I do need a working end. First, we're going to attach the bead to one side. So go ahead and unwind the hemp cord a little bit so you can get just one of the strands that it's made from. And now go ahead and thread one of these strands through the bead. I'm just going to check again and make sure I've got this at about the right spot for the length that I want. That's about right. So go ahead and tie a knot above the bead to hold it in place. Just slip it down towards the bead. And then also tie a knot below it, again to keep it in place so it doesn't unravel the cord any more than it already is unraveled. Shift it up to be right underneath the bead. There we go. Now we're going to add another knot just holding these two cords together. So put both of them together, make a loop, and put the bead back through. This is why you need to make sure you leave enough length at the end of the cord when you trim it, so you have enough room to add lots of knots to hold it in place. And I'm going to do one more knot. Just slip it right down below the last one. Alright, so that's pretty sturdy. Now to keep that from unraveling, just grab a little bit of the sealer, dab it on at the base where you're going to trim it, and this will be like a glue just to keep it from unraveling anymore. Now we can trim that. Now all we need is a loop on the other side. Okay, so what I didn't keep in mind was that adding these extra knots was going to make this even shorter. So since that's a little bit too short, I'm going to take a little bit of length from the other side, just like this. Let's go ahead and actually put the loop on the end of this one. So just make your loop, and then again tie a couple of knots. We want the loop to be just big enough to fit the bead through. So grab the bead and just make sure you can still slide it in. Perfect. So just make sure that's nice and tight. I'm going to do another knot below. And one more knot just to make them match. Again, grab some of that sealer so that the end doesn't fray too much. And then trim the end of the cord. Now let's go ahead and loop this back through. Just make sure they're even. Put them back through our loop and pull it tight again. Now just put it on by slipping the bead through the loop, and then that holds it in place as a necklace. Just try that on, make sure it's the right length. That's pretty good. Right, so if you want it as a necklace, that's the way you would finish it. Now I'll show you an option for finishing it as a keychain, or like a clip to put on your backpack or your bag. For the lanyard clip, decide on how long you want for it to be. Fold it in half. Put the two ends through. I think that's a pretty good length, and then give it a little extra because the knots are going to make it a little bit shorter. Now just do a couple of knots right up to the base of the lanyard clip to hold it in place. It's nice and secure now. So again, we'll grab the brush and dot a little bit of the sealer on the knot to keep this from fraying when we trim it. And now to attach the lanyard, just push the loop through from the back. And bring this through the loop and pull it tight. And now you can clip it onto your backpack or onto your keychain. With these ends, you can just trim them off flush. That's one option. I think what I'm gonna do is just put a couple of knots and make them more decorative. So let's just see how this looks if we put a couple of knots in the end. There's one. Do the same with the other strand. There we go. And that's a pretty good keychain there now. So this one is still not dry. I will have to finish that another time. But you have two options there. You can do it as the keychain, or you could attach it as a necklace, whatever your preference. So this guy is all finished. You can add as many coats of the sealer as you like. I would say 3 is probably a pretty good number of coats. Just keep them nice and thin and watch out for brush strokes and air bubbles. I hope that you have enjoyed this video and that you feel inspired to create your own Pokemon Go pendant. Remember that this is just one suggested way of finishing it, but you can add your own artistic flair to your pendant. So check out the store, find your team logo inspired pendant, and start making.